Most people are shocked that Sweden has started tightening immigration and citizenship rules here. But for me, this really is nothing new. I am a Sri Lankan who moved to England, and it took me 10 years to get my British citizenship. I had to fight for a work permit for over 2 years. Finally, I got my work permit. And when it was time to get my residency, after 3 years, they suddenly introduced an extension of a year. So it became 4 years. And finally, after 10 years, I was able to get my citizenship. I actually bought myself a Mulberry handbag in celebration of it because it was so difficult. And today I'm going to talk about my journey. And I hope those of you who are in the thick of it here in Sweden, and those of you living in Sweden and want to know more about what it is like in other countries, this video is for you. So in today's video, I want to talk about my experience in immigration and citizenship and why this process is so complicated, so sensitive, and it really is much, much more intricate than people actually think. So I was brought up in Sri Lanka, and I remember in the 80s, Sri Lanka had a really bad rap, 80s and 90s. Before that, on a Sri Lankan passport, you could travel pretty much to any country. But after the civil war broke out in Sri Lanka, it changed everything. Obviously, there were people who were scared for their lives, who fled the country genuinely and moved to Australia and Canada and the UK. But with that, you always get a group of people who seize that opportunity, who see the loophole in the system and use it to move on to greener pastures. So there were loads of people who moved abroad who really didn't have to, who were not marginalized in Sri Lanka. And that really created a lot of illegal immigrants from Sri Lanka going to other countries. Suddenly we found ourselves with a Sri Lankan passport that needed visas to most countries in the world. It was really a shame. And I remember when my mom and I used to travel, my mom used to have to get visas all the time. We traveled in 1985 to the States, to Holland, where I have my cousins, to the UK, where we had friends, and we wanted to go to France. So after we decided to do that trip, my mom had to get visas for all of the countries we were going to visit. And it was so difficult. And eventually the French embassy refused to give us a visa. So we couldn't go to France. I still haven't been to Paris, and I've been living in Europe for over 20 years. I just haven't made it there. But I remember it was such difficult. We were so upset and so angry. And it was just, we were so genuine, and we really never overstayed visas. But it was just what it is. And I understand the frustration. So when I was really young, that really made a big impact on my thinking of travel and how I wanted my children to have a passport that didn't give them those kind of restrictions. Now, that was a childhood dream of mine, which I was eventually able to make come true. So right from a really young age, I decided I was going to go abroad. I wanted to work abroad. And the easiest route for me, or the route, I was working and studying as a Montessori teacher. And it opened up that in the States, they were looking for teachers, and I applied for a job there. Now, I was in the process of getting the job, and fate would have it that 9/11 happened, and the lady who was going to give me the job in Pasadena, California, she got cold feet, and they suddenly stopped giving visas to anybody coming in naturally because they're trying to protect their country, especially after such a huge event like 9/11. So that dream really got crushed. I was so upset. A month went by, and my mom said, "Why don't you just go to England? Your friend is getting married there. She invited you to the wedding. Go there, and then you come back and we'll regroup and decide what we're going to do." So that's what I did. I visited the UK. While I was there, I had some friends who noticed that there was a real shortage for teachers, especially Montessori nursery teachers. It's quite a big thing in the UK. And so I thought I'd just apply. So I applied to 3 jobs. I got all 3 jobs, chose the one that was closest to where I was living, and I got my work permit. Now, I got a work permit, I think it was for like 6 months, and I started work with her. But then we had to get extensions. She had to get some lawyers. We had to change some rules. We had to add in Montessori teachers as a highly skilled migrant workers. It took a long time. It took almost a year actually to get all of it sorted out. Once it was done, I also had a colleague from Turkey who I'm very, very good friends with even now. She had done her Montessori course in England at the time. and we both had to apply for visas. It took almost a year, but eventually my boss, Angela Coyne, she was such a sport. She really worked hard. We got private lawyers, like I said, and eventually we were able to get our work permits. Now, we didn't do anything illegal. It just took a long time. These things take a long process. You apply and then you realize you need something else. And then once you get that sorted out, then it's something else. It's always like this. So it's really frustrating. But eventually I was able to get my work permit and I worked on it for 3 years. So once the 3 years was up, you could apply for your residency. And this is what happened. I remember very clearly I was at the same friend who got married at her birthday party in, I think, the end of January. And I was so gutted because I got a call in the middle of that party. The lawyer called to say that had made a change to the rules and now we had to wait an extra year before we could apply for our residency. I was so angry. We'd waited for 3 years and we were supposed to apply in April, and the new law was coming into place before that, and that meant we had to stay another year before we were eligible to get our permanent residency. So it was so difficult, and obviously all the old feelings came back up again. But what were you supposed to do? You can't do anything about these things. There's always going to be a group of people who get stuck in the middle. And I know that's happening in Sweden at the moment as well. And I know for those of you who'd already sent in your papers and you're suddenly having to wait another year, I can understand just how frustrating it is. You want to cry and you're just so angry. But sometimes these things are really out of your hands. You can't do anything about it. It was the same for me. So I had to stick it out another year. By the fourth year, then I was able to apply for my British residency. Now, I applied for citizenship after that, but you had to do a language test as well as a culture test, which I think Sweden has just started implementing, and I did in 2010. I had to do a language test as well as a culture test in England to get my British passport. After that, it took, I think, 6 months to 8 months for them to process the application. I had to physically go there, take all of my IDs, all of my papers. Once that was done, I had to wait, I think, another 3 months before they actually said it was okay. Then I had a ceremony and then another month to get my British passport. So it took me almost 10 years to become a British citizen. And it was a long process, many obstacles, but it is what it is. We as lay people have absolutely no control over all of these legal immigration and migration and citizenship rules. Absolutely nothing. And we just have to go with the flow. And my biggest tip for those of you in the middle and the thick of things is not to take it personally. It's nothing personal. It's just the government doing what they think is best for the country. They are also a body of people who we've elected to run the country. So in retrospect, we can't do anything about it. Getting angry and frustrated is not going to do any good, I think. But I do know that when it happens to you, you just want to scream because you are so angry and frustrated. Once I was able to get my British citizenship, I moved to Sweden. Now, the reason I also worked really hard to finish that process is because I didn't want to move to Sweden and have to go through all of it again. The British passport is something I did for myself, a lifelong dream of mine, something I was able to give my own children. But obviously I'd met my husband a few years before I got my citizenship, so I planned to stay in England. I was able to get that, and then I moved to Sweden. Now, it was also a smart decision on my part because at the time we didn't have Brexit, so I was able to move to Sweden quite easily, very seamlessly, and it was no problem. So I moved to Sweden and I started living here immediately. I got a residence permit after a few years, and once I got my permanent residency, I just left it at that. I didn't think anything more, but I already had my British one. I don't need anything here in Sweden. I'll just have permanent residency and I will be fine. And obviously that wasn't the case. Suddenly Brexit hit. And once Brexit hit, I panicked again. I was like, oh no, now what am I going to do? So eventually, I'd been living in Sweden for over 5 years at the time, so it wasn't a problem. I just sent in my application and it went quite smoothly and quite fast for me to get my Swedish citizenship since I'd been here anyway for so long. But I really panicked. I got really stressed out because I thought, oh no, what does this mean now? And I know it's really difficult. Even in the UK, a lot of people were able to just travel in on their Swedish or whatever European passport they have. And now they've tightened the laws that if you are a British citizen, like if I traveled recently, a couple of years ago, I traveled to England, I have to physically go in with my British passport. I can't show them my Swedish passport. I have to show them a valid British passport. And I know that has caused a lot of problems for a lot of Brits living abroad. And I do feel for them as well. So I just wanted to make sure that people here in Sweden understand that it is immigration and citizenship is a huge stress for everyone living in most other parts of the world. This video is going to be long, but I want to cover all of the different bases. So now in recent times in Sweden, we've had a lot of talk and a lot of upset people because young adults are being sent back to their country of origin. Now, while I feel so much for them, it is just an awful feeling to be living in a country like Sweden and get used to all of these and then suddenly being told you have to move back. It reminded me of a story of a friend of mine. So I know this girl, and she is one of my good friends' best friend. She moved with her mom to the States when she was young. Now I'm almost 50, so she's around 48. So she moved to the States when she was a young girl. I think she was maybe 12, 13, something like that, with her mom, who got a work permit. Now, while her mom was working there and she was a minor, she was able to be there on her mom's passport. But the moment she turned 18, she had to move back to Sri Lanka or apply for an American passport. Now, I know she struggled so much. She actually was able to have a child in the middle of all of this, and it was all very, very complicated. And she tried for many years her American visa to stay and citizenship legally. And even though she had her daughter was able to live in the States and her mom was continuing to live in the States, she had to move back to Sri Lanka. So she's been living in Sri Lanka for a few years now. And I can understand for people like that, it must be so frustrating and so heartbreaking to be away from your family and have to move back. But unfortunately, these are rules that countries have had for a very, very long time. I think it's really unfair on these young adults whose maybe parents have not known all of the rules. Do understand also the country's point of view, that they are looking at it from a whole perspective and they are not looking at it from an individual perspective. Unfortunately, that's the way immigration and migration works in most countries in the world. I just wanted to also add this into the video. When I got my British passport, I had to forego my Sri Lankan passport. Although I was brought up in Sri Lanka, born in Sri Lanka, and held a Sri Lankan passport, the Sri Lankan government didn't let me hold on to my Sri Lankan citizenship. I had to forego that and get my British one. Now, I did that. Unfortunately, that's the system in Sri Lanka. And then what you need to do is reapply for your Sri Lankan citizenship, which is what I had to do. I had to pay quite a lot of money to become a Sri Lankan citizen again. And that took a long process as well. So you can see even third world countries like Sri Lanka have really strict laws for our Sri Lankan citizenship. So it is a really complicated process. My eldest son can never get Sri Lankan citizenship because I wasn't a Sri Lankan citizen at the time he was born. My youngest son has got a Sri Lankan birth certificate and citizenship, but he has to reapply when he's 18. My husband can't get Sri Lankan citizenship, even though I'm a Sri Lankan citizen now. There's a lot of red tape involved in all of these countries, and each country has different rules. I mean, am I angry that Sri Lanka wanted to take money from me and I had to apply for my Sri Lankan citizenship again? Of course I'm angry. Of course it's frustrating. Of course, I was so gutted, but it is what it is. I cannot fight the system. The system and the rules are in place, and I can only wait it out, which is what I did. I eventually got that. It took also a really long time, a few years actually. And once that was done, now I'm finally in a place where I can just relax. In conclusion, I wanted to say this. I think countries have a right to protect their borders, that immigration and citizenship is never an easy process. But I do believe that we need fairness, humanity, because it's just not laws and regulations. It's people's lives. And most of these people are very, very genuine. And as someone who's gone through all of this from Sri Lanka to the UK and from UK to Sweden, I totally understand all of the difficulties that everybody is going through here in Sweden and all of the frustrations that they're feeling. But unfortunately, citizenship and immigration isn't easy anywhere in the world. It's not just paperwork, it's people's lives, and it's really, really sensitive topic. And I hope I haven't offended anybody here today. That is not my goal. My goal was to just relate my story, my frustrations. For those watching who are in the thick of it, you understand that so many years ago, I went through all of this in the UK. Sweden is implementing rules and regulations now that some countries have had decades. For all of you who are still in the thick of immigration and citizenship, wish you all the luck in your process. To all the Swedes watching, I just wanted to give you my story so that you understand also the frustrations from somebody who does come into Sweden and how difficult it is for those of us who want to get citizenship and have to go through so much. There's so many people. For example, my children will never know the struggles that some people go through with their passports. My children will never know struggles of getting visas or any of those things. And that is something I chose to do for myself and for my children. And I'm really, really lucky and blessed. It does not go unnoticed by me just how lucky I am to be able to have a British passport, give my kids a Swedish passport so that they don't need to worry about these things in the future. But having said that, things could change in the blink of an eye. Rules and regulations, maybe suddenly the Swedish passport might not work easily anywhere else. Today, it's one of the best passports to have. People living in other countries, some people are really happy living in their own countries, and they think, come to Sweden, and then they don't like Sweden at all. And they were like, why do you even want to live in this country? And then there are some people who really love Sweden and want to be here. So, there's always two sides to a story. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it's been a little bit long. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you so much for being here. Subscribe, like this video. I'm hoping in some small way my story will help give you a little bit of peace. So if you are in the thick of immigration and citizenships here in Sweden or anywhere else in the world and watching, my advice to you is be patient, stick it out, and I hope for those of you getting sent back to your own countries that you find peace somehow in this process. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.